Hello everyone, Ramblepack here with part 2 of my 2023 in review. If you haven't seen part 1, then I recommend you check it out. Link in the description below.
It is written, only Link can defeat Ganon. Great, I'll grab my stuff.
The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is, undoubtedly, one of the biggest releases of the year. For many, this will be their choice for the best 2023 had to offer, hands down. Others have claimed it made Breath of the Wild, already a new standard for open world games, obsolete. There are others that feel like Tears of the Kingdom ought to have taken a page out of Elden Ring's design handbook, even though there's no way it could have had a substantial influence so late in the new Zelda's development. Then there are friends of mine that never liked Breath of the Wild to begin with, and Tears of the Kingdom was just more of the same. For me, it's a bit more complicated. Tears of the Kingdom is probably one of the best games for players that just want a single world to spend dozens, if not hundreds, of hours in. The kind of person that has purchased and repurchased Skyrim several times and loyally loves Bethesda because their games are just big, expansive worlds focused more on providing things to do than fine-tuning the mechanics. But if you want a game that, at the 100-hour mark, can still make you say, "Whoa, I didn't expect that," then Tears of the Kingdom just might be your game, because despite the typical formulaic design of the open world activities, there will still be moments where they completely toy with your expectations or sneak a little hidden discovery over to the side. The problem is that I am not the kind of gamer that wants to spend dozens or hundreds of hours on just one game. Not a single player, story-driven game at least. The longer a game runs, the more inevitable it is that I will do my best to just burn through that content. If I'm playing just to push through and see the credits, then I'm going to be less forgiving of things that feel like a hindrance to that goal or just do not provide a sense of satisfaction. As such, I'm going to come right out saying that the temple locations in Tears of the Kingdom, the replacement of divine beasts from Breath of the Wild and replacement of traditional Zelda dungeons, outright suck. Well, except maybe the Gerudo Lightning Temple. In fact, the Gerudo main quest might have been the overall best in the game. On the whole, however, each of these locations felt as if their individual gimmicks wore themselves thin. The boss fights, meanwhile, gradually became more frustrating due to relying on your spirit companions rather than key items. There are brief windows where the boss's weak point is exposed, so you turn around and have to find the right companion as they all scatter and cluster and just do whatever they want. This problem with the companions dovetails into a user interface problem where these spirit abilities ought to have been tied to a wheel or D-pad functionality or something. Sadly, all the buttons on the controller were kind of taken up already, which sort of leads me to another reason why I, personally, am not fully sold on Tears of the Kingdom. It's just too darn big, and there's just too much. Of course, I had this problem with Elden Ring, and I'll probably have this issue with every open world game I play. At some point, each of these kinds of games becomes exhausting for me. With Tears of the Kingdom, however, the problem is exacerbated by what was originally one of its biggest features, the depths. Whereas the overworld is designed for you to see and be distracted by any number of landmarks, the depths are completely dark, concealing so much information from you. The most visible things are hazards, and sometimes there will be no sign of a nearby light route from which you can brighten the surrounding area and illuminate your map. At first, this made the depths exciting, as you had to completely change your mindset and approach to exploration. However, there are several jarring walls that create impenetrable borders and rifts between areas, and the elevation differences are so drastic that, combined with the impenetrable darkness, it makes a chore out of trying to explore and reach a desired goal. Now, part of this is because you're not supposed to just keep wandering the depths for extended periods of time. Much of your exploration is intended to be initialized by diving down into the depths from above, which includes finding secret, hidden passages down that are not so obvious on the open world map. However, even with this in mind, this doesn't just mean the depths are a complete shift in mindset from exploring the surface world. It means that the core philosophy of carving your own path forward is impossible in the depths. Or at least incredibly diminished by intentionally segmenting and blocking portions of the depths off from one another. What made Breath of the Wild work, and when Tears of the Kingdom works best, is the provision of an actual sandbox in which the player can explore and experiment at their own pace and in their own way. This was the driving force behind Tears of the Kingdom's Zonai construction, and though I do not have enough of an engineer's brain to really explore this system, it certainly allowed for me to find my own unconventional means to solve problems, and to even work around a shrine's clearly intended solution because, well, I couldn't figure out what the dev wanted, but I found a path forward nonetheless. The ability to look to the horizon, see something and think that's my next objective is the beauty of these games. And there aren't a lot of big budget titles really capitalizing on that sense of freedom yet. It's pretty much only janky survival games lacking some of the core gaming tropes that Tears of the Kingdom still manages to execute well on. Which is why the Temple's End in particular, the depths become rather frustrating. While there's still some degree of freedom in how the player can complete a temple, the depths are so much more limited and restricting. Perhaps this was the purpose, given the presence of gloom and its life-diminishing power, reflecting through gameplay the thematic concept of overwhelming darkness and evil so as to be suffocating. If so, then it might have been better to have just made the depths far more obviously linear than an indecisive halfway effort. Despite my gripes, however, I still spent over 80 hours in Tears of the Kingdom, just shy of my over 90 in Breath of the Wild. I found 98 shrines and 53 light roots, and I completed several optional quests just because I enjoyed them so much. And you know what? There's still plenty more I could explore too. There are optional quests large and small, more shrines to find, corners of the map to uncover, and so much of it is unique. Which is precisely why I can see Tears of the Kingdom being on several people's Game of the Year lists. While I may not have had the best time, I also can't argue the appeal to dive back in and experience more. Despite using Breath of the Wild as a baseline, I understand why Tears of the Kingdom took Nintendo 6 years to complete. It's an excellent game, and it and Breath of the Wild will go down together as a significant point in not just Nintendo's history, but gaming's history. It also helps that the story and final confrontation reach such epic heights that, when you've finished and rolled credits, you feel that exhilarating sense of having just finished a journey yourself. And, depending on your disposition, you yourself might wind up getting a bit misty-eyed from the game's conclusion. Earlier this year, a debate blew up when Naoki Yoshida responded to YouTuber SkillUp in an interview regarding the term JRPG and whether it was a good or bad term or not. Personally, I remember when people perceived Japanese role-playing games negatively, so I understand some of his feelings, but more so, I also think it's a weird, potentially outdated term when you have a Chinese game like Genshin Impact looking Japanese, or in today's case, a Korean game like Eternights. Meanwhile, From Software is a Japanese studio making action role-playing games like Elden Ring, but no one calls it a JRPG despite being Japanese. My proposition is we start calling them anime RPGs because really that's the visual aesthetic people are using to define the subgenre altogether. They tend to not only share similar visuals, but several shared mechanical lineages and even similar storylines. Sure, we can get into further semantics and argue that anime is shorthand for Japanese animation, and so games like Genshin Impact or Eternights still don't count, but the anime style is clearly what they're shooting for. That or we call them otaku RPGs, but that has other connotations. Anyway, Eternights is an anime RPG developed by a small team, spearheaded by a solo developer, and honestly, I am impressed. However, I imagine there could be plenty that feel ripped off given the game is only 10 to 15 hours to complete. Those people are wrong. Aside from the game clearly being intended to be replayed on New Game Plus, and perhaps even on the higher difficulty, Eternights does what most low-budget anime RPGs these days fail to do: not overstay its welcome. Are the dungeons simplistic and largely linear like nearly every other low-budget anime RPG? Yes. However, they're also short. There is no traversing corridor after corridor after corridor for 2 hours slogging through repetitive fights, and yes, I am calling you out, Akiba's Beat and Caligula Effect Overdose, and other low-budget RPGs that I don't even remember playing. There's only about 4 or 5 dungeons in the game, and while there's a clear Persona-style influence of taking several trips in over the course of several days, you can easily play through the whole dungeon in roughly 30 to 45 minutes, with the rest of your time spent in social mechanics and building your character's stats for the boss and dungeon that will follow. Which really is where the game is at its best. You don't level up by defeating enemies, but instead by improving your social links with your companions. Each companion helps boost a specific stat, so one character boosts your health, another your strength, another your defense, and so on. You earn the skill points necessary to improve these stats and other combat abilities by training with that character, scavenging for items with that character, or by spending one-on-one time with them, which will also boost your relationship rank that unlocks greater and greater tiers of skill you can unlock. This is a far better system than most games trying to imitate Persona, and I'd argue it's better than Persona's own system. It's not perfect as it removes experience points from the equation, which begs the question of what combat serves if you're not earning experience. There needed to be some reward or benefit to facing enemies. Some of the more powerful foes will drop what's called Black Essence, which is what you use to upgrade your own abilities, and it's also the reward for exploring nooks and crannies of each map. However, there are no other items in the game, there are no shops, and therefore there's no other reward for fighting. In some ways, this might seem a bit too streamlined of a game, but all you'd need to do is ensure each enemy drops at least one black essence and increase the cost economy of the protagonist's moveset to accommodate. The combat itself is also relatively simplistic, mostly focused on mashing the attack button and timing your dodges so that you can build up your super move gauge to unleash a powerful blow. It doesn't take long to charge the gauge, and enemies develop elemental vulnerabilities that are tied to which element your party companions specialize in. More powerful foes have shields that can only be broken by these powerful blows, so much of combat will be dedicated to studying enemy attack patterns, dodging at the right time, sneaking some counters in, and breaking down those shields. There are other attacks that can be used, such as companion abilities that heal, buff, or deal damage, and other powerful blows that can even one-shot some weaker opponents, but in the end the core of the combat becomes a cycle of efficient elimination of weaker foes to isolate the stronger ones, and then playing cautiously to charge your gauge, break their shields, and then unleash a beatdown. Which, if you break the shields, it is shockingly easy to just get into a loop of knocking enemies down and unleashing powerful blows. There is a parry ability available, but given many enemies will swing multiple times in quick succession, it's more advantageous to rely on the perfect dodge and its Bayonetta style slowdown. So the combat is fine, enjoyable enough, and the dungeons are short and inoffensive with a couple of interesting puzzles, but the draw really is in the writing and characters. Marketed as part dating sim, I imagine many will be turned off from the protagonist being a bit perverted, and one of the characters still being in high school and therefore a minor, but in all honesty, these characters are all wonderful. If Fire Emblem Engage had the worst, most self-indulgent excuse for doujin and fan artists to create lewd art and stories of, then Eternights is hiding depth and real emotion underneath its perverse sense of humor. I'm not going to lie and tell you that it's one of the best stories in a game I've played, because it's not. However, it is effective in ways that big budget games have been unable to manage themselves. These characters are good, many of the conversations are great, and honestly, I wish more games offered dialogue options with this degree of sardonic wit.
おめでとう。あなたは選ばれました。バカね、違うわ。
If you like anime RPGs with character but don't want to set aside 80 hours of your life just for a single story completion, then I highly recommend Eternights. I can't call it one of the best games of the year, but it's easily one of my favorites. I've had very limited exposure to the Armored Core franchise. In fact, the last time I even played one was over 20 years ago. I had replayed the demo disc snippet that came with my original PlayStation over and over, but never pulled the trigger on the final game itself. Armored Core 2 was packaged up nicely alongside my PlayStation 2 for Christmas 2000, but I sucked real bad real early and so gave up on it, never to touch the franchise again. So it was with some trepidation that I picked up Armored Core 6, worried that the trailers were conveying an excitement or hype that wouldn't translate into the experience of playing the released product. And for the first chapter, I felt like it wasn't as exciting as expected. I was able to defeat the first major hurdle, Balteus, final boss of Chapter 1, but only after grinding old missions to afford new parts and weapons. Even then, I ended up relying on a tanky, dual-wielding meta build. I took some time away for a while, concerned that this would be the entire experience, grinding old missions just to rely on meta builds to beat the bosses. But something happened. They patched the game and made it easier. Okay, so I don't know if that's actually the big game changer for me. It's bound to be a factor as I never experienced the rest of the bosses on their original launch balance, and plenty of weapons and armor have been buffed for greater effectiveness. Armored Core 6 is currently easier than it was on launch, though by how much, I don't know. All I know is it took me an hour to defeat the final boss in the Fires of Rubicon ending on my first playthrough, so I feel pretty confident in saying the game is still pretty darn challenging. In fact, after I got that first ending, I dove right in for some more in New Game Plus because, at that point, it had fully clicked. I loved Armored Core 6 now, and I wanted more. And you know what? I not only got to stomp on those first chapter missions that had once been so difficult, but I was delightfully surprised at some of the differences they offered in brand new missions or new mid-mission objectives. I wouldn't say New Game Plus reveals more of the story, but it certainly deepens it. The first run through might as well be the introduction, and with the context of all the characters in play, the second playthrough offers an opportunity to better understand the events at play and why certain characters are doing what they're doing. It's a bit of a classic From Software method of not spelling things out, but still more obvious than the Soulsborne entries, as things obviously click and a greater explanation is provided. Rubicon and its surrounding politics are quite interesting, it turns out. At the end of the day though, it's the combat and mechanics that really make Armored Core 6 resonate for me. A lot of other critics have pointed out the expectation to keep swapping gear out based on the mission, and this certainly is a big part of the experience. Even though I've reached a point where I have my go-to build with my favorite weapons for most situations, I still find it worth swapping out gear based on which boss I'm about to go up against, or experimenting when facing particularly tough foes. But swapping out gear is only part of the mechanical experience. The real meat and potatoes is in awareness. Awareness of your surroundings, awareness of your HUD, and awareness of which weapons you have equipped. Due to the game's lock-on even when you're not locked on design, you're not going to play this like a twitch shooter where precision is king. The precision is determined by your build, with an emphasis on the fire control system, where you're going to want to pick based on your preferred distance from the enemy, close range, medium range, or long distance. However, it's also based on knowing when to fire a weapon. Early on I relied on bazookas and rocket launchers, but the projectiles were slow and required me to come to a full stop. Not only did this make the weapon worthless on quick-moving foes, but it made me vulnerable. It meant being careful when to rely on such a weapon and on which foes. I rely more heavily on a plasma rifle for most fights these days, but it's still a slow projectile and therefore I only want to fire it when close or mid-range and when the enemy is in a more static position. Dual-wielding machine guns with high-speed kinetic ammo are best against quick-moving, reverse-jointed opponents, but you don't just want to relentlessly unload your ammunition since that will waste so much of it. The pulse guns can tear apart shields, but run out of ammunition quickly. This means you want to stick to close range and fire conservatively. The HUD is vital for knowing when missiles are ready, and while the game will audibly inform you that your health or ammo supplies are depleting, they could see a delay due to narrative dialogue and communications taking priority. So your eyes will be focused less on specific enemy positioning, and more on how close your gun is to overheating, or running out of ammo, or missiles being ready, or even your health. Combined with the game's focus on breaking an opponent's stagger, all the emphasis in action and combat is on tactics, strategy, and your build rather than twitch reflexes. While quick reaction is still useful for success, it's only one factor as the best players will know how to manage their weaponry, firing only when a hit is assured. If you want to rank high on missions, you'll no doubt learn how to best use the least ammunition possible while also eliminating as many foes as swiftly as you can and as efficiently as you can. There's so much to what makes Armored Core 6 not only enjoyable, but so insanely replayable and unique compared to other games. It's also uniquely accessible because it focuses on all kinds of attributes other than twitch reflexes. Nowhere as accessible as the slower-paced, less hectic Dark Souls franchise, but allows for a greater variety of player than your average high-octane, twitch-based shooter. It is, without a doubt, one of my favorite games released in 2023.
Name? Mario. Last name?
Mario.
Okay.
Super Mario Bros. Wonder is pure, unadulterated happiness in video game form. There is so much character and personality that you can't help but feel delighted. Of course, much of the heavy lifting in this regard is done by the game's presentation. If you're not familiar, Dan Root is an animator whose YouTube channel, Video Game Animation Study, breaks down good examples of animation in video games. Naturally, he did an episode on the series of unique animations of Super Mario Bros. Wonder, where he commented that many have illustrated how expressive the characters have become. It's a good watch, but I think being expressive is just half of the equation. The other half is that these characters are reactive. It's also strange how much a player won't notice just how reactive these characters are, likely because most players are always looking towards their next objective. I imagine if you were to conduct an eye tracking test, most players' eyes would be spending more time looking at their next step rather than their own character. So the number of unique animations Dan Root points out in Super Mario Bros. Wonder can easily go unnoticed due to how tied to the player characters they are. However, many players will still see things like the aggressive, determined expression of Koopa Troopas as they approach our heroes, or the sudden panic as a fireball or bubble approaches. That many of these little, unique details go unnoticed kind of encapsulates why it's difficult to explain precisely what sets Super Mario Bros. Wonder apart from its predecessors. Everything fits together so well that even pompous, self-appointed critics such as myself shut their analytical brains off and just have some fun. For the past decade, it's felt like Nintendo's built their levels like gray box stages. No sense of place or setting or theme. Just a bunch of obstacles and mechanics sequentially placed one after another. With Super Mario Bros. Wonder, they made the additional effort for every world to have a unique setting and theme, often filled with unique enemies where every stage features recurring types of challenges and obstacle courses unique to that very world. Regardless of whether it's an easier take-a-break style of level, or a more challenging stage for high-skilled players, everything is engaging. Even the easier, low-stress maps without risk of death are puzzles to be solved. The goal isn't merely to complete a stage, it's to find all the secrets to gain every Wonder Seed, some of which are hidden to unlock secondary exits and reveal previously inaccessible portions of a map. While I don't think the world-transforming Wonder courses are as surprising as the marketing tries to convince, they are filled with unique mechanics and concepts despite every single level having such a transformation. Very few concepts are repeated, and when they are done either as a callback near the end game, or are evolved or combined with other prior Wonder stages, adding new twists to keep the experience fresh. Which brings me right back to this game just being a permanently affixed smile, gamified. There's so much imagination and creativity, all behind a deceptively simple perspective and genre. I wouldn't be surprised if more care, craft, and thought went into Super Mario Bros. Wonder than most of the AAA releases this year, but because it's this side-scrolling platformer, and the latest in the family tree of platformers going back almost 40 years, it's going to be underestimated. Sure, it's on plenty of Game of the Year lists, but as I said with many of the unique reactionary animations, it's easy to miss just how much care and craft went into every digital inch of its world. The way the game absorbs the player into its courses provides an unending sense of fun and is guaranteed to delight. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is a phenomenal game. And holy crap, they took the Dark Souls online messaging and spirit system and just Nintendo'd the crap out of it. Yeah, you could play offline and just be one of the Mario crew hopping around by your lonesome, but you miss out on so much wordless teamwork that the online connection provides. You can be saved, you can help save someone, you can leave hints to hidden boxes or platforms using the standees. Super Mario Bros. Wonder isn't just a new side-scrolling Super Mario game. It's the new standard in the franchise and it's perfect. It's a perfect Mario game. If you grew up with Mario, you need to play it. That's simple. For many, 2023 was the year of remasters and remakes, and Super Mario RPG fits right into the continual reminder of some of gaming's greatest past hits. This was definitely one of my favorite games of my childhood, and much like the Dead Space remake, they remained absolutely faithful to the original with only a handful of quality of life improvements in order to maintain that same feel of the Super Nintendo release. An act of high quality graphical preservation while offering some concessions for modern audiences. Admittedly, I had wondered at first if they had made an already easy game even easier with 3 changes. The first is the ability to strike all opponents on the map with perfect offensive timing. In the original game, you could deal bonus damage by timing a button press at the right moment of an attack. The same is true in this remake, only there's a secondary, more precise window of timing that will also deal damage to the full group of foes you face. While it technically does make the game easier, it's also a bit of an advanced technique for players to utilize. Now players can take the gamble of planning their targets with this splash damage effect in mind, and if they manage to hit precisely, then they can wipe their opponents out faster. If you fail to hit that timing, however, then those enemies take no splash damage and you'll still need to take them out one by one. The second addition was a charge gauge that allows for group attacks based on who is in your party. This gauge fills up with each properly timed button press for attacks or defense. They can swiftly wipe out a whole group of enemies or deal incredible damage to bosses, cutting many fights short. The third addition was the ability to swap characters in and out during battle, allowing the player the opportunity to substitute characters suffering status ailments or who have been knocked out, or are even less valuable in a certain situation. This is most useful for some of the more difficult fights, allowing players to apply buffs or debuffs, situationally heal, or even change party members based on which group attack they wish to utilize. Though these adjustments technically make Mario RPG easier, they also change how the player engages with the combat system by allowing more options, which means increasing the tactical possibilities in each fight. A good turn-based RPG is mastered through the player's ability to overpower their opponent through efficient tactical decisions, and the changes in Mario RPG award players capable of taking these new tools and utilizing them intelligently. As a result, adjustments I was originally up against due to the game being made easier gradually became welcomed, as they took an already enjoyable combat system and made it even more enjoyable. I do, however, wish the game implemented a higher difficulty mode rather than just offering an even easier setting. Nonetheless, Mario RPG fulfills Nintendo's design philosophy by being simple enough for children to play and follow along with, while more experienced players are also rewarded with enough depth to master its systems. Much like Eternights, Mario RPG also provided a role-playing game that could be finished in less than 20 hours without feeling too short or overlong. Short even for the time period it came out, I love the brevity and wit of the game's narrative, allowing for a quick trip through the colorful world of Mario. If only would inspire smaller RPG developers to perhaps create more retro but visually and mechanically distinct games without having to stretch content out for dozens upon dozens of hours. Super Mario RPG was a great way to experience a classic in a new way, and I highly encourage anyone that missed this on the Super Nintendo to pick it up and give it a whirl.
I had strings, but now I'm free.
I play a lot of good games in any given year. I've been able to better evaluate a trailer and determine the odds that I will find a game worth playing. While it's been some time since I faced a real, genuine disappointment, the truth is I also rarely share the same hype and excitement for any given game that the rest of the gaming audience seems to enjoy. So in a year everyone describes as being great for video games, well, it was good. I just don't know if it was great. Lies of P is an exception. I was hyped for the trailers, but it wasn't until I got my hands on the demo that I was certain this would be a special game for me. Much like Armored Core 6, I didn't really get around to playing the finished product until it had been patched. It's possible that, had I faced its initial difficulty level, I'd have felt differently about the game's challenge. Yet the title I played was the Souls-like experience I've been craving since Bloodborne. Sure, I know there's a lot of reasons for that satisfaction. YouTuber Mugthief did a good job illustrating how development studio Round 8 had studied the attack animations of From Software's titles, imitating but not outright plagiarizing. They're referencing From's painting, but they're not tracing over it. This influence is written through all of the game's mechanics. While my first thought when seeing the different Legion arms in Lies of P was Devil May Cry 5, it's far more likely that the different arm attachments of Sekiro Shadows Die Twice were what Round 8 had in mind. The perfect parry was also clearly inspired by Sekiro as well. However, neither of these mechanics are doing precisely what Sekiro did. Round 8 took these ideas and remixed them for their own purposes. Rather than directly imitate Bloodborne's rally mechanic, wherein you restore health after taking damage, Lies of P introduced Guard Regain, health that you can restore after successfully blocking an attack. However, the perfect parry is also a perfect block. No health is lost, and damage is done to the integrity of the opponent's weapon and stance. The ability to break the opponent's weapon is perhaps the most significant addition that Round 8 had made to the Souls-like combat formula. In addition to the incredibly satisfying feedback of timing your block perfectly, resulting in a loud clang in the highlight of the opponent's weapon, it is possible for the player to enter a boss arena with the intent to break a boss's weapon. Early phases will often be easiest to time blocks and parries, and if you break their weapons early on, then not only will they deal less damage throughout the entire battle, but they'll even be impaired for the second phase of a fight, the very phase where enemies are often more intense and hostile. This doesn't work for every boss, of course, but it is still a viable strategy and is just one way in which Lies of P may have studied From Software, but have chosen to do their own thing. Despite many complaints from the community regarding Lies of P's linearity, I've found enjoyment in the less meandering nature of the game's design. The different side passages and shortcuts can become predictable over time, but every level is still well paced. Every shortcut felt precisely and carefully located, and every new stargazer from which you could respawn was placed in an ideal location where no shortcuts made sense. Enemy placement and encounters feel thoroughly tested and balanced to catch reckless players off guard, but to never be unfair. If anything, Lies of P feels more forgiving to me. So sure, the level design is more linear and follows a formula, but in addition to visual variety and design and the sheer number of enemy types, the various encounters, set pieces, and unique obstacles are handled excellently and with masterclass craftsmanship. Again, it could be just because I'm playing this game after patch, but it feels like one of the most balanced challenge games I've ever played, especially after the infuriating difficulty of some of Elden Ring's late game areas. It is one of the few titles this year that I finished with the intent of starting over and playing all over again immediately. With Lies of P, I have a whole host of customization options at my fingertips between the unfortunately named P organ, the many amulets which can be equipped, and, most importantly, the weapon combinations. But while they enrich the game's combat, they'd be nothing if the core combat mechanics weren't already so good. Speaking of weapon combinations though, if you ask most content creators what the greatest innovation in Lies of P is, they'll probably tell you it is the weapon system. Unfortunately, it can be a bit of a troublesome system on your first playthrough, especially if you prioritize certain stats or struggle with where to put your resources. It's a system that definitely shines stronger on replays and New Game Plus after you've gotten a handle on, well, handles. There's an endless number of weapon combinations between blade and handle. By allowing the blades to be upgraded separate from their handles, it actually allows players more freedom and experimentation than your typical Souls game does. Both titles have limited upgrade resources available, but you can use an upgraded blade to make a whole new weapon and moveset with a different handle. Each weapon you find, from start to finish, is viable regardless of when you find it and what upgrade resources you possess. Yet Lies of P does not exist in a story-free vacuum. Somehow, Round 8 Studio took the fairy tale of Pinocchio and turned it into a fascinating dystopian narrative brought about by the arrogance of man. This, too, feels absolutely fitting with the narrative of Bloodborne, another tale of a society destroyed by the arrogance of key figures seeking ascendance. A city pays for the ambitions of a few key selfish figures. Yet within this concept, the notion of what makes us human is explored, and whether lying is a sin or, at times, a kindness. Or, perhaps, the truth is that what makes us human is our capacity for evil. I cannot argue with the notion that 2023 was a good year for game releases. Across these two 2023 year in review videos, I've discussed plenty of titles I would recommend to a lot of people. And honestly, I find pretty much each of these games worth multiple playthroughs, not just Lies of P. But no other game gripped me as much as Lies of P had. It is being sorely overlooked in Game of the Year discussions, which honestly doesn't surprise me at this point. However, I implore anyone watching this that, if you haven't, give Lies of P a try. Lies of P is, easily, my favorite game of 2023. So that about covers it. Lies of P is my favorite game of 2023, with Armored Core 6 coming in as a close second. Of course, my evaluation is largely based on the games I wanted to replay the most upon completion, as the older I get, the more I value replayability in a game. To that extent, I'd say while 2023 may not feel like the best year in games for me, it still feels pretty good. I'd like to put more time into nearly everything I played this year, big and small, which is more than I can say for most years prior. As for what 2024 has in store, well, I don't know. Despite January being about over, I'm not really itching for anything new. In fact, I'm more itching to work on other videos, and to therefore replay a bunch of games I'd love to discuss. I'm sure there will be releases in the new year I'll be salivating for, but for the time being, I'm content just digging into what I have and talking about it. If things work out well, then hopefully I'll make a decent amount of content this year. But, well, life has a tendency to throw a wrench into the works. Which is actually why this video took as long as it did. I hoped to release it by mid-January, but, well, between sickness, work, and other things, I found myself unable to put this together on time. Better late than never, though. So what were your favorite games of 2023? What are you most looking forward to in 2024? Leave a comment below. Until next time.